part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of Producing While Asian. This is your host, Don Mike Mendoza, with today's conversation with Julianna Austin. She is currently a rising senior at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, but she comes from the Hudson Valley of New York, and she is here to talk about her perspective as a Generation Z individual about the arts industry, entertainment, producing. She's also joining the Latido Productions Pittsburgh staff this summer as a summer associate. And she's also making her off-Broadway debut in a show called One Day Down in New York City. So without any further ado, here's our conversation with our youngest guest to date, Julianna Austin. I hope you enjoy, and welcome again to Producing While Asian. Hey, Julianna, how are you? Welcome to Producing While Asian.
Hi, Don Mike. I'm good. Whew. I'm really excited to be here. This is so cool that I get to chat with you.
It's so good to have you. And like I said in pre-interview, like you are our youngest guest to date. So thank you so much for accepting my invitation to jump in, and like especially like the day of, because we had such a good conversation earlier in the week, and and today in our production meeting, that I'm happy to have you. So let's talk about you. Tell our audience kind of, who you are and how you got involved in the arts, and, how you ended up at Carnegie Mellon University.
Sure, yeah. I'm just a dude. I was an industry kid, so I owe it to my mom for biting me with the bug, I guess, if people still use that term.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I started as a little child actor. I mostly did voiceover commercial print. My 15 minutes of fame were voicing the bee in 3 episodes of The Wonder Pets.
Yes.
It's a funny thing that I tell my friends and then they never shut up about it. But that's how I started. I got into theater a little bit as I grew up, and when I was in elementary school, I took a break in quotes from doing industry work to actually like have a normal childhood and focus on my studies. And when I really fell in love with theater was late high school, when I realized that there's so much more to acting than like song and dance and being able to like sing and dance pretty. There's actually a crazy emotional depth to it that I had no idea existed as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you don't realize that it's like real emotion. It's not like I'm pretend like we are pretending to some extent, but like that it's real emotion. Like it comes from a real place and it's exhausting. So
yeah. But it's beautiful, and I'm still in that love affair with really learning what acting is. And that's how I made it to Carnegie Mellon. That's how I met you.
Yeah. And so, for our audience listening, I met Julianna because she got involved with Latido in Pittsburgh with our ONP AANHPI celebration show on May 13th in 2022. And you identify as Filipino American, and we're so excited to have you here. And what I'm most looking forward to in our conversation today is about your perspective as somebody who is learning the craft and also wanting to explore all facets of the industry that we live in, because I think it's safe to say that I'm at least a decade older than you. So like times when I was in college are very different from what they are now, especially in what we're studying. We both, you are studying and I studied musical theater. So we're kind of in that same place, but it's really exciting to hear your perspective as somebody who's actively studying and learning and growing right now. So talk to us about, performing as somebody who's a young person. I hate saying a young person because I'm not that old, but it's, tell us about that experience and how you're exploring that part of your theatrical toolbox at the university.
What's fun about Carnegie's curriculum is that we do not perform for the first 2 years. And I think there are other conservatories that do that. The freshman and sophomore year, it's just studying before you get the chance to be on stage. And I'm really glad I had that time off, because my perspective on what I want to do as a performer and as a storyteller has changed so deeply.
Well, that's great. It's there's a lot to say about when you take a moment to focus on the actual technique of what we do, as opposed to jumping in and performing and taking on, just being in a show, not just to be in a show, but being in a show, because obviously it's what you love to do. But it's really an interesting point to stop and like look deeper and kind of take it apart, so to speak, because I feel like that's what you're doing in your first 2 years, is you're looking at each part of being a performer and being a storyteller and understanding kind of on a micro level all the different parts of what we do, so that when you get to junior year, you are able to put it all together and put it into practice. So I think that's an excellent way. I went to a liberal arts university, American University in DC, and so I am wearing the shirt for everybody that watches this on YouTube. Ours was a BA program, so we weren't a conservatory. So we studied other things, and we were allowed to perform, our freshman year. But we had a different experience in the sense of like we were performing and also learning. So I would always, grass is greener on the other side. I would have loved to see what it would have been like if I had not performed for my first 2 years and just concentrated on learning and tweaking my technique as an actor, as a performer. So, all different perspectives, but I feel like either way, we both come out strong on the end of it. How was your first year performing then as a junior, having all of that knowledge and, I mean, for lack of a better word, rehearsal, so to speak, in the craft? How was that?
It was really wonderful. I think in those 2 years that I wasn't performing, and one of the honestly, one of the bigger things for me, besides fully immersing in technique and all of that, is the journey that I've had with discovering myself and who I am as a storyteller. So I feel like I'm a very different actor than I was when I was 18 and coming into conservatory for the first time, because I think I started in a place where I very much subscribed to the thought of like a type, and I can do this type really well, and that's going to be what I have to bring to the industry. And maybe that's just, where I came in, but I don't think I'm the only person who thinks that, especially as a teenager.
Yeah, absolutely. You see yourself in media and roles that you admire, and you think to yourself, well, I look like that, that's what I'm going to do. Or like, I sound like that, that's what I'm going to perform and sing like, so it's, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of perspective from the outside in those 2 years.
I've also learned that like that's not, I have so much more agency than I originally thought, and all of that journey, I brought that into this year of actually re-entering, I guess, the performance space and choosing what I want to put forward rather than letting someone choose it for me. And I think that really informed my year. I was in 2 shows, one of which was, I worked with a director who is a very close friend of mine. Her name is Samantha Toy Ozeas, and her senior capstone was a 2-hander play called Athena, which is about these 2 high school fencers training for Junior Olympics and their relationship and how that's so significant. And like one of the big questions during that process was, do you remember what it was like to be 17 when everything was so important and you're like just on the precipice of getting out of high school and going into college and the real world and starting your life? And if I had done that show when I was a freshman in college or when I was 17 or 18, the way that I would have gone about playing this character, I think, would have been with a lot less strength and depth than I would now at 21. Because I like to think I know my strengths and weaknesses as an actor, but also as a person.
Yeah.
Broad, but...
I mean, that makes sense. And, always perspective and hindsight help a lot, to act something in the moment. If it's something that's very relevant, like this story that you're saying, if you were 17 and acting 17 in what the context was, it would be very different because you are actively experiencing that, as opposed to at 21, 3 years later, 4 years later, like looking back on that experience and being able to inform it with more life experience, so to speak, and to recall it rather than performing it while you're going through it. I feel like there's a different feel. You're able to safely go there as well, because we all know that acting has safety triggers that we need to follow too, especially if that moment in time for you was not great. I don't know, but I think life experience always is helpful, and it's always helpful to have something that you can refer to be able to inform that. So you did that show, and then what was the other performance that you were part of?
Oh, it was in Newark. It was in the Carnegie Mellon School of Drama's Festival of New Works. It's the MFA playwriting grads. Their pieces are gone up. So I did a play called The Real Girls. It was a radio play, and it centers on see if I can explain it in a concise way, because it's really cool and layered. But it's these four teenage sisters who get like AI implanted into their heads, and then they become a pop group. And it's commenting on the way that young women are treated by the media, but also the way that social media and technology is kind of all consuming our lives and the influence that it has on consumerism. Sure. It was so much fun. It was a radio play. I played like 40 different characters all at once. Wow. It was awesome.
That's awesome. That's so fun. I mean, like, and it was truly a radio play, right? You did it over voice and recorded it. Very cool.
Performed it for a live audience, but it was just us around a table with microphones and all practical effects for the most part.
Okay. Yeah. That's great. So
two very different experiences.
Yeah, of course. You know, doing a radio show versus a full-on, on stage moving my body, you know. So having done 2 shows now and kind of seeing a festival and learning your craft, you know, I'm sure there are other parts of the arts theater world that you want to explore in. And I know you and I have talked about how you're kind of coming into being curious about production and the producing side of the theater and performing, and, you know, evidenced in the fact that, you know, you and I talked, and you came to me and said, how can I get involved with Latido as, you know, as somebody on the more managing side and the more production side of the organization, and especially for someone like you who came with the knowledge of casting because of your parents, you know, kind of now that you're kind of expanding and exploring that side, the non-performing side, talk to us about that. Kind of what is bringing you into that curiosity, and what do you hope to kind of learn, and I don't want to say accomplish, but like, you know, you will accomplish, but it's like, what do you hope to learn to take with you and to learn in production, especially as somebody who started as a performer?
Well, I think above all else, at my core philosophy, I am a storyteller. And, you know, as a performer, there are going to be times when I'm not going to fit into a narrative or not be right. And then I still want to be involved because I want to tell stories, and this isn't super technical, but I feel like I have so much heart and enthusiasm and like jazz to get these things done. And I think as someone who has navigated the industry as a performer, I have a lot of soft skills that can apply to producing in ways I just don't know of yet. So
yeah, of course. So I have a fun question for you. So as somebody who, you know, you are in the learning phase, before you and I met and before we had longer conversations about producing and stuff, what were your thoughts of what a producer is? Talk to me about that. Like when somebody would say the word producer to you, what were the things that came to mind in terms of what you thought that looked like, or who you thought those people looked like?
The first thing that comes to mind is money, is the financial aspect, which sort of deterred me for a bit. So it was like, I'm a broke college student. What can I produce? Ha ha ha. But definitely being sort of a beacon of, you know, gathering a team and making something happen. Not necessarily like an all-seeing, all-knowing, omnipotent force of a project, but I had this perception of like a producer is the one putting all of the gears together, and then once they start turning, that's part of your responsibility as well.
Gotcha. Cool. I wanted to know, because there's always like wild answers to what people think producers are and who they are. So like your answer is very normal. You know, there's some people who might say like, oh, it's like these creepy people who like, you know, create these situations where they like earn all the money and then everybody else is poor and stuff like that, you know. So which does happen, you know, unfortunately, as we've seen in past years with certain producers who have not handled the responsibility well. So I can see why that kind of stereotype of producers also exists. I think your answer was like very smart and informed, which I think is awesome. So,
Yay.
and I'm glad that money didn't deter you from wanting to explore being a producer. But I understand that side because I also had that same, not fear, but like the same kind of doubt of like, well, producing means money. Like producing means you have to be some kind of rich person to call yourself a producer, which is not true. Being a producer in whatever industry it may be in is that you're just really good at organizing and really good at relationships and really good at bringing people together. So it's about organizing, but it's also about being a leader and being somebody that, the people that you bring onto your team trust. So on that scale of 1 to producer, then, that we ask all of our guests, now that you're kind of exploring, where do you think you stand on that scale right now? Obviously, that answer will change over time, especially as you go through your career. But today, in 2022, 1 being not at all, producer being producer, where do you stand on that sliding scale of that term?
I think I would give myself a 4 or a 5. I think with my relationship with you now being solidified has put me closer to a 5, because I think that I really want to. I have a tendency to be harder on myself than a lot of other people will, and that to say, I think I have a lot of skills already that will be very conducive to me being a good producer, and I just don't know how to put them into action.
Sure.
But I bet you could scroll back in my past and you, Don Mike, would be able to identify times when I have produced something and I wouldn't have called it that,
Of course. Right. Producing is so tricky because there's no definition of that. It's a title that appeared, and where you call yourself a producer because you produce something. So you put something together, but it's a very like morphing kind of word that means different things to different people. So, but yes, you could look back on your early career now and say, oh, that was definitely producing, when you thought you were just like doing something with your friends or your classmates or a show you were a part of. Producing also touches on responsibilities that you do for a show, like there are showrunners, there are line producers, there are all kinds of different responsibilities that fall under that producer title. The difference between an executive producer and an associate producer. Associate producer is somebody who in some cases does everything. They're there to support the executive staff. So I think we also get into a lot of misunderstandings where people forget that there is a corporate structure in the arts and in projects and how things work like that. So I think that's something that I'm still learning, 10 years later, because there are new titles that I see every day, but definitely something that you'll come across and adapt to and look into.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Voorhees.
And I'm Brian Shaw. No, not the pitcher. We're the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast.
Formerly known as a Swing and a Tribe.
Don't have time to watch 162 games of baseball? We have you covered with recaps, stats, and analysis throughout the MLB season.
Subscribe now to Guardians of the Land MLB podcast and Press Play Podcast Network for all your Cleveland sports analysis.
I'm Julianna Austin, and this is Producing While Asian.
So, looking back at your career so far, especially your collegiate career, where have you been a producer? Where do you feel like you've kind of done that without knowing you were doing that?
For the most part, I would say in our student work festival, it's called Playground, and it's a section of time where we just have no classes and no budget, but everyone is like given free rein to create the things they want to tell. And sometimes they're like plays, they're musicals, sometimes they're really trippy art pieces, performance art pieces, whatever. I have been a part of that every year since I've been at Carnegie. And there, on some of the smaller projects that I was on, like as a freshman, I was mostly just doing what people asked me to do, which was performing until it wasn't, And then as time went on and I became an upperclassman, I started throwing ideas out, or someone would throw me an idea in passing and be like, well, why don't we actually pitch that? You're going to do this, I will do this, let's take care of it, and then it's made. I think you'll love this one. Are you part of the Facebook group Subtle Asian Traits?
Yes, I am, but I haven't seen
it that lately. Into a show.
That's amazing. I mean, I would watch it.
Oh, it was wonderful. We did my freshman year. We did it, and I wasn't on the producing team, but they brought me in as a freshman as a performer. And then I mentioned that I'm a fight director as well. And so I said I'm a fight director as well when I was 18, and it just started and had done like small things. Sure. And the producer was like, or I guess the exec who was running our little show was like, "Cool, want to do a 13-person Coliseum fight with the entire cast?" And I said yes, and I think I did an all right job, because when we brought the show back, I was then on the core creative team, and I did some of the writing, and I did a lot of wrangling of talent. Our little team had our full script read-through at VOW in Oakland, and we were talking about who's going to direct this side and who's dealing with the school on this side, and I had my hands kind of everywhere. Mm-hmm. It was wonderful. It was invigorating. We did get shut down by COVID because 3 of our creative team members got COVID, and then the whole festival was canceled, and it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. And that's everybody's story in this pandemic period. You know, we've all had at least 1 or 2 projects that have been, or more projects that have been canceled because of the terrible, terrible Rona. But I would love to see that show if it ever comes to life. I mean, like, this.
We're trying to resurrect it.
Yeah, because like seeing that, being part of that Facebook group, again, for people listening, called Subtle Asian Traits, it is wild in that Facebook group. It's, you know, a lot of, you know, shit talking, but like a lot of like, you know, memes and stereotypes and things making fun of ourselves and other people. But that would be fascinating to see as a show, like bringing those personalities that you see in that room to life. And so I'm glad that you guys are on it. I mean, like, everybody listening, you heard it here first. So Subtle Asian Traits, the show.
Subtle Asian Traits Live 2.0.
Right. And so I hope it comes back this year in that in Playground, if that's happening next year in 2022-23, the school year.
That's the goal. That's the plan.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And is everybody from that team going to still be at CMU next year?
It's going to be passed down to the younger generations.
Okay.
Yeah, many of our team members are graduating, but we've got me, we've got my friend Brayden. We actually, this year, I think we had the biggest Asian population in the School of Drama that we've had ever. Great.
That's awesome. And it's good to hear that, because when you hear CMU, and I'm sorry, Carnegie Mellon, but the stereotype on the street is that all the Asians are in the, you know, engineering and math department and not in the drama department. You know, it's
really the whitest school at CMU.
Right. And so the Asian population, you know, for me that grew up in Pittsburgh, you know, I think of CMU, and if I think of an Asian person at CMU, I'm like, oh, they're like a science major, which is like a really bad stereotype. But like, you know, that's just what the reputation is on, like, in these streets, is what people are saying about CMU. The term Asian Harvard, you know, comes to mind. That's what CMU is called here. Oh my gosh. You know, so there's that. But to know what you just said, to know that there's a big AAPI population growing in the drama department, that's awesome. You know, good. That's really exciting to hear, because CMU is really good at theater and really good at the arts. And so to know that more people like us are being trained there opens the door for the future. Talk to us about representation and like your views on that, and how, you know, I know you and I had a side conversation about mentors and looking for people that, you know, can help guide you in any part of your career. And for this podcast, the purposes of the podcast, talking about producing, talk to us about how you see representation in the industry right now. Because I know, again, it's very different from when I was looking as a 21-year-old. You know, I know it was hard for me to find any role models. Actually, there were none when I was, or at least none that were accessible to me at that time. So what are you seeing in your experience right now in your student age group? You know, what are you seeing in the industry?
I'm definitely seeing a lot more representation than I was even like 5 years ago with, diversified faces and diversified identities having space in in stories and in media. The conversation that's being had with I guess my age group
Yeah.
is now onto the issue of diversity versus erasure, which is somewhere that I don't know if I don't think the industry is caught up to
Sure.
that conversation. So we talk a lot about, I say we and I mean my student group when we're on topics of diversity, equity and inclusion. It's one
A lot of
thing.
words. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of words. I'm on that committee too. I gotta say I'm a lot.
Right.
We talk a lot about representation and like getting diverse faces into the media, but also having them be right. So like I know many actors of color who are like of the generation slightly before mine who have played the wrong races all the time, and that is an issue that I think my generation is kind of sticking on. Like if you're going to be up there representing, you better be representing accurately.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
I mean,
is
that's a
interesting.
bigger, that's a bigger conversation too, because you get into the weeds almost, where you're like, okay, we're trying to make representation accurate and make it matter. But then do you go so far as to say like, okay, well, if we have this Filipino role, it should be a Filipino person always, because you look at people who identify as Caucasian or white, they play different white people all the time. Like they could be American, they play British, they could be, South African, but they play, a Southern Alabama person. It's the rules are kind of different. So now you look at people of color and you look at, for example, just talking about the Asian population, do we get so specific to say, if you're Vietnamese, you need to be Vietnamese. So does the cast of Miss Saigon need to be all Vietnamese people? Because quite frankly, the cast has been a majority Filipino people for a very long time. So, and that's not to say that there haven't been Vietnamese people in the show. There are, and, they are Latino alumni, but, it's how do we broach that conversation? And that leads us back to the topic of, do we still sit in the place where it's like roles go to the best actor? And then we touch back on, so then if it's the best actor, how do then they represent the best way? If they're Asian identifying, but they're playing not their ethnicity, so ethnicity and race is also a really tough conversation because you go into nationality versus ethnicity and all of that. So that's a big conversation that you guys are having. And I think that's excellent.
Well, and it's interesting too that this is something that I talk about with my peers often, but take that with a grain of salt, is that we are not out into the industry yet. And the industry mentors that at least we're talking to through school are primarily white people. There is a real change that needs to happen in most higher education institutions where you're diversifying your student population, and then your white faculty is not going to be equipped to teach them the way they need to be taught. That's certainly that is true of Carnegie Mellon. That's true of every other institution that exists.
Yes. American is the same way. They're making the moves to diversify in all aspects of the university, but you're still going to run into an imbalance of having a lot of students of color, but very few mentors of color and very few examples of color for the students that you're bringing in. So yeah, I agree with you. I see that happening nationwide. It's really exciting that our universities are making that effort, and you can see the work getting done. But there's also those little kind of holes in the work where you're like, okay, that's great. We're representing more in the student body, but how do we translate that to our staff? How do we translate that to our faculty? Because the students are going to come, and then they're going to look for themselves in the people that are staff and administrators, and they might not find them right now. And so all really great things, but it's awesome to hear that it's actively being discussed in your age group. So given that, what is your hope? What do you hold hope for in what's coming in society, but, specifically in the arts and producing and acting and all of that?
In the arts, I would like to see creators of color and creators of all diverse identities on shows on projects telling these stories, you know? Like, just even as an actor, I'm seeing more diverse faces, but staffs remaining entirely white, or having like a white creative team and assistants of color. I want to be, and I think I am part of this wave of change that, you know, as power shifts to be more equitable, because I think that's the way that stories are going to be told more authentically and with more respect.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think it's coming. It's just, you know, change happens slowly, and that's such a difficult thing for me to, and for people of my age group to understand, because I've been on this earth for not very long.
Yeah.
Is change happens more slowly than I want it to, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel the same way. You know, but it's encouraging to see, you know, now that I'm in my 30s, you know, knowing that conversations are being had by 20 somethings that we didn't have as 20 somethings. And it's the stuff that you know, yeah, you can say fought for, but stuff that we kind of encouraged our industry to start looking at. But seeing it come into practice with these discussions actively being had. So you're right, change and progress comes slowly, but it's happening. You know, it's exciting that it's here, and who knows 10 years from now what it'll look like. And you know, I think as long as it's being discussed and action items are being created, and with regards to producing, that, you know, producers are, you know, following or practicing what they preach, right? And having that idea of like, okay, well, we can say we're going to produce stories about people of color, but it only means something if it actually happens. You know, like seeing Netflix, for example, Never Have I Ever, you know, like seeing like stories like that is really exciting. We just had Eddie Tan on this podcast last week, and he, you know, talked about his experience as someone who's Vietnamese American, who's excited to be on a show where he just gets to be a normal Vietnamese American person. Like, you know, it's not about magic, it's not about superheroes, it's just about a person who goes to school, you know. So I think that's the change that we're seeing. And you're right, just in 5 years, you know, 5 years ago, there were a lot of things on TV that weren't.
Hey everyone, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. Backed by popular demand, I'm excited to let you know that new episodes of the Hyman Podcast will drop every other Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're going to continue the conversations we started last season and keep having those hard conversations. There is so much in store for you this season, and I'm excited to share it with you. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single moment. The Hyman Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
We are excited to announce that we are joining the Press Play Podcast Network. The Krypton Report podcast is dedicated to all things Superman, Supergirl, and the planet Krypton. We discuss movies, TV, game, comics, and all things DC.
So join me, Tyler, with my co-host James and Jania.
So join us as we explore DC's multiverse.
Look for Krypton Report on all social media platforms.
I'm Julianna Austin, and this is Producing While Asian.
So you're going to be a senior in the fall, right?
Yes.
Oh man, exciting times. And you're also making your off-Broadway debut this summer.
Yeah.
Like, that's so exciting. Like, first, well, before I get into the question I was going to ask you, tell us about that. Tell us how you got involved with that production, and what is it?
Ooh, okay. There is an off-Broadway festival called the She NYC Festival of woman identifying playwrights and directors in Newark. And my, again, darling friend, Samantha Toya Zayas, she's a playwright, she's a director playwright. And one of her original pieces is part of the festival. And I am going to be it's a rewrite of the first play she ever wrote back in 2017. It's an adaptation of that. And it's so good. It's so good. It follows a high school mock trial team a few days before nationals, where they're doing their final practice case, and it happens to be off-puttingly graphic and violent. And TW, it's a sexual assault case, and it is the discourse that comes from this group of teenagers having to debate both sides of a sexual assault court case.
Yeah.
And it has to deal with the stigma of speaking up that assault victims often face. And it's very well written. It's very personal. It's like, I am so excited to be a part of it because I'm working with this incredible team of CMU artists. And that's part of what CMU has done for me, is introduce me to a network of folks when we're all still in the brewing stages of like, I met Samantha when I was a silly 18-year-old who didn't know things, but there was something in me that she was like, I kind of like her. And there's something in her that I saw even before we worked together. It was like, I see your vision and I see the potential for how far she's going to go. And I know she's going to be huge. I know she's going to be huge. She's
awesome.
Brilliant. But it's like, it's instead of just like networking, I think the true connections come from knowing each other as people. And and that's how we went from, working together on a university show to something that we're both making our off-Broadway debut in.
And what's the name of the show again?
It's called One Day Down.
One Day Down. Got it. So I hope lots of people come and see it this summer.
I hope so too. I also think, tell me to shut up if I'm on my soapbox.
No, please.
I love stories about teenagers, and I think we're seeing really good stories about teenagers coming out recently. I just watched the second season of The Wilds, but like this is about kids in high school. And I think my character is a freshman, so she's either 14 or 15 up to senior year. And there's something so important about telling stories about kids that age with respect for the age group.
Yeah, and making them real,
Yeah, making them real and showing them dealing with real world problems and not trivializing the experiences of, of teenagers.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like TYA, right? Like with Theater for Young Audiences, like kids will respond more when you are real about your story and your performance. They will immediately pick up on somebody who's being fake or somebody who's being over the top or like too much, or ingenuine, because that's not the real world. Outside of that performance space, they deal with real interactions with people and how we are in normal life. So, I would hope that it was even more so for stories about teenagers, because teenagers aren't dumb. Like they know what's happening in their lives and what affects them. And I agree with you. It's nice to see smarter, more genuine storytelling about the teenage age group, especially in a world where there's so much access for them. Like they can see and hear and spend time absorbing on so many levels. It's not like, oh, go get a book or, oh, go to a movie. It's like, it's in your pocket on your phone. Like you can access information and be influenced 24 hours a day. So, that these kids are on Netflix, they're watching streaming stuff, YouTube, whatever. So yeah, I think that's also part of where this industry can go. That also touches on representation. So like imagine AAPI, AANHPI teenagers that are looking and watching and observing, they too pick up on stuff that's like false to them, because it's kind of, you see yourself in the media and it informs things in your life too. I think, we can even have a whole conversation about mental health and how portrayals in the media decided upon by producers who might not be of color, who might not match that ethnicity or that demographic, how their choices affect people's mental health and mental well-being. Speaking personally, as an Asian man, it really is a detriment to the way kind of my group grew up, because in the media, we were portrayed as the nerdy friend, the non-attractive buddy, the one who's like probably the most scared in a group of friends if it's like a horror movie, just like not, nothing of substance. You're always like the sidekick, you're always whatever. And so that translates into your real life, where you think to yourself like, oh, well, if that's all I'm worth, then, that's all the world sees me as. So like, I'm not going to pursue certain things because that's what I feel I am, because that's what's being reflected back to me, especially with teenagers who absorb so much.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that? And talk to me about intersectionality as well, being Filipino, being a woman, being part of the LGBTQ plus community, like, all of those things. I used to see that in the media as like separate things. They were never like together. And if they were represented, it was very stereotyped. So what are you seeing in terms of intersectionality? And kind of the same question earlier, like, what are your hopes for that? What are your observations? And how do you hope that producing will influence that in the future?
I mean, I think in the future it comes down to like getting these people on teams and when I think of authenticity, I think that's so important, that when anyone is writing and producing characters of any identity, like, to make that character a person and not a caricature is so important. And it's something I'm seeing more now, like when I was a kid, and I didn't know a lot of things as a child, and I will pretend that I did. But, I would identify, I'm realizing this now about myself, I would identify with characters that did not necessarily share my identities, but they shared my core values, or I saw like parts of the way that I resolve conflict or deal with emotional issues in characters that were like definitely not portraying an Asian or a mixed girl or a queer girl or any of these things, or a queer girl question mark, she, they, whatever. Lots of identity questions. And it's like, I have not yet seen myself in media, and
right,
that's okay, but
it could be better.
It could be better. Yeah. Like I mentioned before, I just finished season 2 of The Wilds, and
that's one I'm meaning to watch.
It's so good. It's so good. And it's a fun, compelling story. And it answers the question of like, what if Lord of the Flies was with a group of kids that were not just privileged white British schoolboys? How would that be different? So it does a great job telling that. But the original, like the season 1 cast of girls who were thrown to that island are of all different identities and backgrounds. And they are portrayed with such genuineness that I feel like it's such a win, that show. And that show being like number 2 streaming on Amazon in the US is just such a win for seeing girls and women and non-binary individuals with realistic bodies of different backgrounds, and you get a look into their home lives, where it's like, I can't recall the last time I saw Native American representation with Native American actors on a show. I think that the industry is moving in the direction of doing more of that.
For sure. I mean, have you watched Heartstopper?
No, not yet, but I have to.
You have to. It's so good. It's like a lot of people in my age group are like, why was this not my high school? Why was this not, my time? And there's also like some level of trauma as well with all of us, where we're expecting something bad to happen. Like we're expecting the disappointment that we've all experienced, and you don't get it. You get what you want in this show. And I think all of us are just like crying because we're just like, oh my God, it's a happy ending. It's a happy story. And it's about normal people. That's not some like, exaggerated caricature of students in high school who identify as LGBTQ plus. It's a real story about a real issue that, yes, affects straight people, but also affects LGBTQ plus people, because I saw a preview for a movie that's coming out in September called Bro or something. It's written by Billy Eichner. And the preview was talking about what it's like. He's a gay podcast host who got approached by Hollywood producers to write a rom-com about gay men or gay people. And so it's, Heartstopper and now this Bro movie. You're seeing more of that kind of normal life people. I think in the preview there's a quote where he's like, he talks about the Lin-Manuel love is love, where he's like, he doesn't speak about Lin-Manuel on like specifically, he speaks about the phrase, and he's like, people are out there screaming love is love, but that our love as LGBTQ plus people is somehow different. And he was like, it's not. He was like, it's literally the same. We're just as frustrated as straight people. It's just, that's what love is love means. Like love is we are just as frustrated as our straight counterparts in terms of finding romance and all of that. And so that's the movie that he writes. And so, yeah, Heartstopper, highly recommend it. I will watch The Wilds if you watch Heartstopper, and we'll compare notes.
So down.
And, now the question that I was going to ask you is, now that you're, and I hate reminding you of this, but now that you're heading into your final year of university, what's some advice you can give incoming freshmen who are following your path and going into the drama department as perhaps a person of color who's trying to learn it all? What now heading into the fourth year, what would you tell first years about what they could do? Maybe whether it's advice you've heard and it's worked for you, or advice that you've created on your own based on your experience?
That's such a tricky question to answer. To give to like someone who wouldn't have any context, because I've been on the side of like, oh, this is a dream school, like go follow your dreams, some of this great stuff, versus like there have been I've had a time that has been traumatic, like deeply.
Of course.
Sometimes, and I don't want to come towards someone with a really jaded perspective, but
no, of course not.
I think to boil it down to a single phrase, it's a bit of a tired phrase that everybody will say to you, but your education you're going to get out what you put in. And I mean that with work and with learning, but also with like mental health and well-being and your place in any program and agency. When I came in as a freshman, the imposter syndrome is through the roof. The normal imposter syndrome that anyone would face going to such a prestigious institution of any kind, and add to that being a woman, being a person of color, being queer, all of those things that make you think like maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe I was a diversity thing. Maybe I got microaggressed in my audition. All of those things that feel bad. My journey with all of those questions has had some really jaded downs where it feels like I am fighting for my place and I'm fighting to be seen and heard. And then there are the highs where it's like, because I've used my voice so much and I've definitely pissed a couple people off, but I'm trying to do so respectfully. It's like, now that I'm using my voice is being heard.
Sure.
So
you can't make change if you don't piss people off. That's what happens.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the truth. But it's good advice. It's like, I don't ever want to start, I don't like upsetting people. I don't ever want to start fights. But sure. I grew up a little bit in the years that I've been in college, and I know I have a better idea of my worth and what I have to provide rather than to prove as an artist. That's
great. That's really great advice. I think part of that, what you're saying too, what I'm hearing is like just being open, to the experience. Yes, I think a former guest on the show, we had a conversation. Her name is Trinity Villanueva, and she is Filipino, Hawaiian, and Puerto Rican. And she was talking about the term imposter syndrome. And she was saying that is a very like colonizer term, because, we have imposter syndrome because of white supremacy, where we were meant to feel like we don't belong because of oppression, when really we belong. We're there. We've been there all along. There's never been a case where we didn't belong, because we're just as much a part of this world as white people, and imposter syndrome only came to be because of the influence that the colonizer class has had on people of color, convincing us that we didn't belong when we were there the whole time. So it's, of course, generational trauma that we're dealing with in terms of talking about imposter syndrome in specifics. But, she made me think differently about that term, where I was like, how, it kind of made me more determined to overcome it and to just be and take up space, because we're allowed to. Like, there's no permission to take up space because we've already been here. We're not coming to a space where we didn't belong before we got there. We belong there. And so I don't know what the alternative phrase is. I don't know what we're going to call it, but with imposter syndrome, like she really flipped my thinking on that. So, just fun perspectives to think about. So I am so glad that we got a chance to talk today, and that I could hear your story and your opinions and your ideas about things. And, your perspective is so important, especially for those of us who are out in the real world trying to do what we do, to hear the perspective of a younger person who's seeing a lot of it for the first time, and is going to have that chance to make their mark still. Not that all of us have already made our mark and we're done, but like, I'm saying it's nice to hear somebody who's part of the up and coming group of people that are going to change the world and change our industry. So it's very exciting. I'm looking forward to working with you this summer. I'm looking forward to what you're going to bring to the arts table in your final year and in your career after CMU. And yeah, kill it. You're going to kill it. Like, it's going to be awesome. Like I feel like the people that are listening are going to get endless amounts of hope from you, because it's, I know that I talk to my friends and we always wonder, we're like, what are college kids talking about? Like, what are they, thinking of and planning? And so I think you illustrated a lot of it, not all of it. Obviously you're not the token representative for all Gen Zers, but, I think you've given us a really good view into what's going on in your community. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks for inviting me on. This was wonderful. And I'm so excited to I'm so excited to work with you and to just, I don't know, you have so much perspective, and also getting to work under you as a Filipino person is like so affirming and so needed for me and for a lot of young artists.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, me and Alex Manalo are so pumped to have you on board, and, to have our trio of Filipino people working on Latido in Pittsburgh. It's going to be great. And, you're welcome back on this podcast anytime. If there are topics that come to mind that you're like, I want to talk about that on Producing While Asian, just, you know where to find me. You're now part of our awesome past list of guests who've been on this show. So before we go, where can people find you? If they want to work with you, if they want to contact you, where can they find Julianna Austin?
Currently based in Pittsburgh and New York, but you can find me all over the internet. My website is juliannaaustin.com, which is, I have 2 N's in my name, and it's Austin like the city. And all of my social media profiles should be Julianna Austin. So like my Instagram, which I follow you on, it's Julianna, and then the A carries over into Austin.
Nice.
It's silly. But yeah,
but that's good though. As we should be in this era. And so I ask that because I want people to find you. I'm tired of hearing people say, I couldn't find Asian people. I couldn't find a person who was this ethnicity or this part of this community. So, shout your contact info to the skies. So, alrighty. Well, thank you again. And I will see you on the next podcast episode, and let's get to work.
Let's get to work. Thank you, Dominic.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We're produced by Press Play Podcasts, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a rating and a review, and send any ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, or to read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com.